The Cabinet of Dr Caligari is considered to be one of the quintessential German expressionist films. It's arguably the greatest silent film of all time. We'll talk about that today on the Golden Hour Film Podcast. Is it the perfect first silent film if you've never seen a silent film before? And plenty more details about the absolutely insane behind the scenes. All this and more on the Golden Hour Film Podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Golden Hour Film Podcast. Yes, we are back. It's number 13. Probably no more fitting film for number 13 than this spooky ass shit coming from German expressionist 1920s cinema. It's a lot. And covering it today with myself is, of course, my co-host, not guest host, Shane Mulvaney.
How you doing, Harry?
I'm doing alright, yeah. We are covering, if not my favourite, then my second favourite film of the 20s and prior. I kind of bunch a lot of those films in together, to be honest, and this is an amazing film. I'll just say it from the top. I think if you've never seen a silent movie before, this should be your first one. How do you feel about that statement?
Yeah, someone who hasn't seen anywhere near as many silent films as I should, really. I've got probably count with one hand, maybe if not, definitely less than two full hands. It's a really good way to immerse yourself and get introduced to silent films. The plot is really easy to follow. It works really well. A lot of people call this like the first horror film, or certainly one of the first films that could be considered a horror film. And you can see,
Yeah, is it Roger Ebert, the
yeah, I
really
think so.
famous film critic? He's the one who coined the phrase that it was the first ever horror film.
And you can see where he's coming from, because even now, 100 years later, you can see lots of horror films that come out now. You can kind of see little things that they were inspired by, whether it be certain shots, certain camera angles, certain ways they move the camera. So yeah, it's a really good look. I hadn't seen this film before, and yeah, spoiler alert, I really loved it. So I could see why it has such a high profile, such a high reputation.
Yeah, it's also in its entirety free on YouTube.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I
So
watched it.
like go give it a watch. It's like an hour and 15 minutes long.
Yeah.
It is so worth a watch. And speaking of YouTube, we are closing in on 100 subscribers. I reckon we can do it before my birthday, which is in August. I think before my, oh God, love me, 24th birthday, we can hit 100 subscribers. I think it's possible. What do you think?
Yeah, fingers crossed. Here's hoping.
Yeah, and the only way that's going to happen is if you guys like these videos, comment these videos, share these videos, and as well, support us on Spotify as well. Give us a listen on Spotify if you have the chance, or Amazon or wherever, just not Apple Podcasts. And if we can hit 100 subscribers, that would be amazing. That would be a cool little milestone to hit so early on into this podcast. And this is the final film of the 4 Euros films that we are covering. We've already covered The Seventh Seal, which is by far our best performing episode ever. Puccin, which did surprisingly well. I didn't
I think
think it would
we have
break
a
in
fairly
the
sizable
numbers.
Irish audience, so maybe that's something to do with it. So
Yeah.
we're certainly not going to complain about it.
Yeah, no, of course. I was quite happy with how Puccin
Yeah,
did. And then last week we covered Bicycle Thieves, which is an Italian neo-realist masterpiece. This week we're talking about a German expressionist masterpiece. Shane, what is German expressionism to you?
German Expressionism is basically a movement that came out of maybe post First World War in Germany, which has to do with like certain camera angles, as I said earlier, like lots of use of shadows. Um, yeah, I'm not sure exactly how to describe it, but it's like,
It's quite gothic, it's
yeah,
quite moody.
gothic's the right word, probably. Yeah, quite moody,
Yeah.
quite dark. Deliberately dark kind of images, dark imagery. Yeah, those kind of things. Yeah,
And with this film, we have a whole lot of dark stuff to cover. So the film was directed by Robert Wine, who actually wanted to make a remake afterwards. He wanted to make a sound version of the film, which, if I'm honest, I haven't seen the gazillion remakes and sequels that have been made that are, if anything, not linked to this film. Really, they're all quite loose sequels or just kind of cheap remakes. He wanted to remake it in sound, but he actually passed away before he had the chance. He had the script written, and he even allegedly had Caesar cast. But here we are. It's written by two very fascinating guys, Hans Janowitz and Karl Mayer. Why are they two fascinating guys? Let me tell you. So Hans Janowitz, one of the writers, got a lot of the ideas for the story based on things that happened in his life. One thing was that he went to a fun fair and he saw like a real shady guy lurking around the fun fair. And then later on, he found out that a young girl was murdered at the fun fair. And then he went to the young girl's funeral and saw that same shady guy lurking around the back of the funeral. There was no evidence or anything to suggest that this guy was the murderer, but he kind of contrived a story from that. Also, he went to a fortune teller when he was about to head to war, and he was told by the fortune teller that he was gonna survive the war. He asked, "How long am I gonna live?" Which is a scene that happens in the film. The fortune teller says, "You will survive the war. However, your friend Gilda Langer,
Yeah.
she's not gonna survive the war." And she was originally actually cast in the role of Jane in this film. She was also in love with the other writer, Karl Mayer. And yeah, the fortune teller was correct. She died months before filming commenced with just a mysterious illness just all of a sudden creeping up on her, and she passed away at the age of 23. So that kind of unsettled him a bit.
Which wasn't uncommon really at the time. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. There could be any number of explanations for that, but yeah.
And then with the other writer, Karl Mayer, who was actually in love with her at the time, which I think they also kind of play with that dynamic with the two male characters and the female character of Jane. Karl Mayer added his elements to the story, mainly the fact that in order to get out of being conscripted to World War One, he faked insanity and managed to pass.
Kind of like a test about like a mental.
Yeah, like a psychoanalysis. He convinced the psychoanalyst that he was insane so that he could get out of the war, but turns out he wasn't. So he actually, that then caused him to then question authority, like, how have I gotten away with this? And that kind of fed into the kind of anti-authoritarian elements of the film.
Yeah.
There's a lot to kind of unpack with those two lads, and as well directed by Robert Wine. But also linked to this film is the German film director Fritz Lang, who is like the main German film director pretty much pre 60s.
Maybe
yeah, he's a pretty big deal, that Fritz Lang fella. So he introduced these lads to the studio exec, who then kind of got the ball rolling on the making of this film. It's alleged that some people blame Fritz Lang for the fact that this film is a frame story. It's split into like a prologue, an epilogue, and 4 parts, or it's actually split into 6 parts, obviously. But the whole prologue, epilogue, and then the story condensed in the middle. And the lads who wrote it, Meyer and Janowitz, hated that element of the film. They absolutely despised it to a point where Janowitz actually took the studio to court because he didn't want it to be split into 6 parts. That's all blamed on Fritz Lang. Apparently it was Fritz Lang who suggested this to a studio exec, and then the studio exec just couldn't get it out of his head. And Robert Wine didn't really care. He was like, yeah, I'll film it whatever way the studio wants. I don't really mind.
Yeah, another couple of things. Nicolas Cage, who, if anyone's seen Longlegs, knows how spooky he can get when it comes to horror stuff. He calls this his favourite film of all time. So if you've seen Longlegs, you can kind of maybe think about Dr. Caligari when it comes to his performance in that, perhaps, maybe. And the physical appearance of Caligari was inspired by portraits, apparently, of the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. So yeah, his physical appearance apparently was a big inspiration as to the kind of weird, slightly demented look of Dr. Caligari. And one other thing is that the sets were made out of paper, with the shadows painted on the walls, and that goes to show the kind of budgetary restraints at the time. Apparently, electricity was actually being rationed as well at the time, because obviously post-war Germany, there wasn't a lot of money knocking around. Everyone wanted reparations, so there's all these social things going on as to why, yeah, there wasn't a lot of money knocking around. So it's even more remarkable maybe how good it looks, because even now
Yeah.
they're pretty convincing. Like some of these sets, you wouldn't have thought that they were. Like I wouldn't have even known that unless I'd actually read about it. They look fairly convincing, the sets. Like, so fair play to them for that.
And the sets are absolutely amazing. Like it, I think one of the core elements of this film is that it's a silent film. I think one of the reasons why the remakes, the sound remakes, don't really work is because kind of the magic involved in this is just it's a visual treat. Like it's entirely visual. There's no like whatever version you watch. Obviously, will have a different soundtrack to it or score to it because it depends on who's remastering the version that you're watching. But when it comes to the visuals, it is all visuals. And the three guys who made the sets, Herman Worm, Walter Rohrig, and Walter Ryman, incredible job. Allegedly, the film didn't do very well at the box office. I think it actually made a loss. And it did get an international release because at this point, post World War One, Germany weren't as sort of scathed by the rest of the world as they were maybe a year or two prior. So it did get an international release, but yeah, it got mixed reception at the time. I know there's like a theater in Paris that like played it for 7 years straight, but then there was also the Capitol in New York, the Capitol Theater. Apparently, it was met with boos, and most
Didn't want to
people
show
demanded
it.
their money back. So, yeah, it was mixed reviews on arrival, but over the years, it's regarded as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, silent film ever made.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I reckon we get into the narrative.
Yeah, let's get cracking.
So, Act 1. Francis, who is played by Friedrich Feher, is recounting this story to this random old man because he sees his wife walking by and she's kind of got a glazed look over her face and she's sort of walking through these tree branches and he basically says, "We have been through a hell of a lot." And I'm going to tell you what it is that we've been through. We flash back to the annual fair at his home village of Holstenwall. And again, straight away, right off the bat, the sets are absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
They look amazing. They're so like jaggedy and pointy and amazing. I just love the way these sets look. And we meet Caligari, who is walking through the village. We don't really know his purpose just yet, but he's sauntering on through the village. And after that, we meet a guy called Alan, who is in his attic. And again, just his attic looks amazing. The windows are all disproportionate. The chairs are ridiculously tall. It's amazing. Just this film looks amazing. And Alan, we know, is Francis, the guy who's telling us this story. He's his best friend. Holstenwall's Fair this year, for the first time ever, is going to have entertainment. We see the fair in a shot. There's like a monkey, and there's like the, what are they called? The spinny things that people sit in, like the teacups, basically.
Yeah, kind of.
They're all in the background, and everybody's having a good time. And Francis and Alan go along. Meanwhile, Caligari in these pretty funny, like the Mickey Mouse gloves. Were they fashionable at the time? The white gloves with the 3 black stripes. Was that like a fashion thing in the 20s?
They must have been, yeah. It must have been maybe like a status thing, even.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, Caligari and his Mickey Mouse gloves is going to the local village clerk, who is kind of the head of the local fair, because Caligari wants to get involved in the fair. What does he want to do, Shane?
So he wants to apply for a permit to host a show at the fair, because he says that he's a somnambulist. Is that the correct pronunciation? Or
Yeah, I think so.
Maybe Caesar is a somnambulist. I'm not sure exactly which. But basically, he wants to host this fair, and this is the way he can do it. But even in
Oh,
this
sorry,
scene,
yeah. Caesar is the
Caesar's
somnambulist.
a somnambulist, yeah. So Caligari
Yes.
is working with him. But even in this scene, Caligari's kind of acting a little bit shady. So
Yeah.
we'll figure out what the fuck He was wanting
Yeah.
a little bit later on.
And
So
again,
at the
just the
fair,
village clerk's office looks so cool.
yeah,
Like they're
everything
on like a ridiculously high table, and like all the walls are so wide, and they're all graffitied all over. It's amazing.
the sets and like most shots are designed to keep you kind of awed about like everything's out of proportion, everything looks weird, everything
Yeah.
looks just a bit off, which is obviously very intentional. Yeah, they look really good. So anyway, coming back to the fair, so people are moving around. It's a pretty busy fair, and Caligari comes out onto the stage, gets everyone's attention, and then he unveils Caesar, the somnambulist, and that's the end of Act One. And yeah, the music is kind of letting us know at this point as well that things are about to get spooky.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, a somnambulist is like a really heavy sleepwalker, and it's implied that Caligari can control this somnambulist. Act 2. Act 2 begins with knowledge that night, the town clerk, who was kind of rude to Caligari, interesting, has been murdered in his sleep by a sharp, jaggedy thing to the side. They said it was like a strange shape, but like everything's a strange shape in this film, so does that not make it a normal shape? Anyway, Caligari's show with Caesar has two fellas in the front row. Those two fellas are, of course, Alan and Francis. They go to see Caesar, who is only 23 years old, apparently.
No, apparently he's been
Probably
sleeping
a
for
nod
23
to
years.
the fact. Say it again?
Apparently Caesar's been sleeping for 23 years straight, and this is now him
Yeah.
being woken up. So I'm not sure if was he meant to be like asleep for since his birth, or is he maybe a little bit?
I'm not sure. I think
So,
it's
yeah.
a nod anyway to Gilda Langer, because obviously she
Okay,
passed away
yeah.
at the age of 23. I would assume.
Yeah, that's
I
true.
think it's a safe bet. And yeah, basically Caligari is like, here, lads, this fella here, he knows your past, he knows your secrets, he knows your future. Anyone, ask him a question. And like we said at the top, you don't want to ask Caligari your future, because Alan asks him, how long am I going to live? And Caesar awakens, and he says, you will be dead by the break of dawn.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Yeah, and then that night, Alan and Francis are wandering around. At this point, like, Alan, sorry, is looking a bit like if I was just told that I wouldn't live until the break of dawn, because initially he was looking spooky, but then a little bit later on, he's walking around with Francis, and he's he doesn't seem too bothered by the whole situation. I'd say.
Yeah.
But anyway, they see a reward poster up about the murder that had taken place, and then they see Jane, who's a woman they both know, I think. So then they go over and they're both kind of flirting with her. They're both obviously interested in this woman. That night, Caligari leaves his house and he's just looking shifty as hell. He looks annoyed, and then he goes back into the house. And then we cut back to Francis and Alan, and they're walking home with Jane. Francis tells Alan that they both love her, but they'll leave the choice to her, basically. Obviously, they're going to let her make the choice, which is nice of them, I suppose. And then that night,
Yeah.
a shadow looms and appears over Alan's bed. So yeah, it looks like the prediction or the prophecy from Caesar will come true. There's a really cool shot just of like shadows stabbing down on Alan. Just great camera work here by the cinematographer whose name is Willie Hamister. So yeah, there's a really sick scene, because sick in the sense of it's really disturbing to look at, but it's also just really cool, kind of the technical mastery that's on display here. And yeah, so Caesar was right. Alan hasn't lived through the night.
Yeah, and whoever this murderer is at large has kind of made that decision for Jane, so don't have to worry about that anymore.
Yeah, that's true.
She can get that off her conscience. Act 3. Francis is told by a servant of some kind that Alan is dead. He has been murdered, and the prophecy has come true. So Francis then goes to tell Jane. And again, just cool that they used different coloured film for different things. They used blue coloured film for the nighttime scenes, yellow coloured film for the daytime scenes, and any of the scenes in Jane's house or apartment are all shot on pink film. Just thought that was pretty cool. And also the doctor, who is her father, he tells him as well of the murdering of their good friend Alan and the prophecy. And the doctor is like, right, we need to go and examine this Caesar fella because, well, you can't really just go around prophesizing that people are going to get murdered that night and then all of a sudden they're murdered.
Yeah, and
So that's kind of suspicious, actually.
Question that as well. Yeah, so he obviously knows maybe a little bit more than he's letting on.
Yeah. Also, a shady looking guy is just wandering round at night with a knife, and an old lady catches him and shouts, "Murderer, murderer!" and he gets caught by the police. So it seems as though our murderer may have been caught. It's kind of hard to tell. I'm sure we'll find out pretty soon. The lads, and by the lads I mean the doctor and Francis, go to examine Caesar. They go to the little, it looks like a little hut out the back of the tent in the fair that Caesar and Caligari are staying in. And they go to kind of question them. Meanwhile, the shady guy is being questioned by the police.
Yeah, Caligari's not too happy about these two lads turning up at his doorstep, but obviously he doesn't want to appear suspicious, so he kind of reluctantly lets them in. And then in the meantime, the lad is at the police station, the would-be murderer, suspected murderer, I should say, and he's kind of protesting his innocence, even though he was found with this murder weapon, and he clearly has just killed someone. So, anyway, Dr. Olson and Francis, they inspect Caesar, and much to Caligari's chagrin, he's obviously not too pleased about this, and they order Caligari to wake him up, but then they receive word just at that exact moment that the Holston 12 murderer, I'm not sure I butchered that word, but anyway, the town murderer has been caught, and Caligari just puts on this really like over the top evil expression, showing like, oh, I just got away with that, and that's the end of Act 3. So, it has the murderer been caught or not? We'll see.
Act 4. And the shady looking guy who's being questioned by the police has a brave tactic, I'll give him that. He says, I am not the murderer. Now, I did try to murder that woman, but I didn't murder her.
Yeah, that's right.
And they're all like, oh, right, okay. And he's like, and also, I used one of them weird shaped daggers like the other murderer because I was trying to frame the other murderer. Which,
Yeah,
like,
that's so dumb.
if things don't work out the way they do in this film, for the police to like even question that is ridiculous. Like, no, actually, I don't believe you. I bet you just are the murderer. Thank you very much.
It's probably the one.
You've literally just admitted to attempted murder.
Exactly. It's probably the one moment of like just really dumb logic in this film. Like everything else has a really good motivation. It's clear to see, really clear to follow along. But that's like that made no sense. It was a bit of a stretch.
Yeah, I don't know if he's just meant to be a stupid character. I think he might just.
Is. Yeah,
I think he may just meet. Yeah, I don't know. He's got a pretty terrible attempt anyway, at getting away with murder, and at the same time, Jane is kind of worried about how long her father and Francis have been gone for. Her father's called Dr. Alphin, by the way.
Yep.
She's worried how long Dr. Alphin and Francis have been. And she goes out looking for them. And instead of finding them, she meets Caligari, who just invites her into his tent at the fair and introduces her to Caesar. And she gets a little bit spooked by this guy who just sleeps standing up in a coffin. Wonder why. And she does a runner from the tent because Caesar has freaked her out. But Caesar is looking pretty awake now after seeing her. He kind of follows her with his eyes on the way out, but it's pretty subtly shot, which is pretty good.
Yeah, and then that night, so anyway, the funeral of Alan takes place, and then people leave. Obviously, everyone's a bit down in dumps. And then that night, Francis sneaks up to Caligari's house because he's still a bit suspicious of this guy, and he peeks inside, and Caligari's asleep. But then we cut to Jane, who's asleep at home, and someone is sneaking up on her. So doesn't take a genius to figure out who that might be. I think it's Caesar. It's clearly at this point Caesar. We can see him, and he's kind of moving like a cat at this point. So none of this like mummified walking that he was maybe doing a bit earlier. Really cool cinematography at this point. Just kind of slowly building up to like a crescendo, and he walks over to Jane, but It looks like he's going to stab her, but then at the last second, he kind of just stops himself. We don't really know why or what his intentions are at this point. She wakes up just at that moment, and obviously she's really startled to find this somnambulist, this like kind of ghost-like figure, look like clearly about to have killed, wanting to kill her. And Caesar tries to restrain her. It's unclear whether he's actually trying to kill her at this point or whether he just wants to get her under control. I think he's probably just, maybe it's the latter. I think at this point. Then two men kind of sleeping nearby hear the commotion, and then they go and try and see what's going on here. But Caesar manages to kidnap Jane. Yeah, she's kidnapped. So the two men run after Caesar, who obviously has Jane kidnapped. They manage to catch up, and Jean manages to escape, but then Caesar escapes, and he's kind of exhausted then, and he collapses. So we're unsure as to what's going on with Caesar at this point in time.
With that chase scene, we get some of the best shots of the film. The shot of Caesar when he first gets out of the room and he gets to like this really high point in this bridge and the moon is in the background and he has her under his arm is one of the best shots in the whole film. And then even on the way back down the bridge on the other side where he kind of lets go over when he realizes that he isn't going to make it much further if he's carrying her is pretty great. What's interesting as well is when Francis went looking for Caligari, Caesar was actually asleep in the house. So it's pretty interesting how at the same time that he's asleep in this house, he's also out here kidnapping people. So there's another element of mystery going on there with Caesar. Is he a clone? No, but there is an interesting answer.
Yeah, and then Francis and Dr. Olfen, they obviously turn to John, her boyfriend, or maybe possibly boyfriend, and her dad. And she wakes up and she remembers what actually happened, which is that obviously Caesar tried to kill her, she believes at this point. They insist that it couldn't have been Caesar because, as Harry just said, Francis was looking, he was at Caligari's the whole time. He was looking directly at Caesar, so it couldn't have been him. But she is obviously insisting that it was. So yeah, who knows what the hell could have happened? What's going on? It's spooky stuff. And that's the end of Act 4. And then we open Act 5.
Act 5!
Which
Sorry,
is
go for it.
Francis informing the police about Caesar. They make sure that the prisoner is secure in his cell before they go anywhere because they don't want to obviously let the prisoner go in case this is just a whole misunderstanding. And Francis insists on speaking to the man, and the man is chained. So Francis brings the police to Dr. Caligari's door. He's obviously nervous and he can kind of feel the walls closing in a little bit. Whatever the hell he's up to. They open the cabinet and they find it's like a mannequin kind of figure that looks
like
Caesar.
a life-size dummy, pretty much.
Life-size dummy, exactly. Yeah. Basically, it wasn't Caesar that was in the cabinet the whole time when Francis was there the previous night. It was a life-size dummy that was designed to look exactly like Caesar. So obviously, there's some sort of shenanigans going on here where Caesar is up to no good and they need an alibi. So they're pretending that he's been there the whole time.
And meanwhile, Caligari has escaped and he's done a runner. He's gone over the hill out the back of the fair, and Francis pursues him on foot. And when Francis gets to the local insane asylum where he thinks he saw him go in, he's lost him. We see that Caligari did go through the insane asylum gates, but Francis isn't 100% sure. But he does come back at a later date and says to the doctors working there, "Oh, did anyone try and break in last night?" And they're like, no, nobody tried to break in. However, the director of the asylum did return. If you want to go and speak with him, he might know what's going on. And he says, yeah, do you know what, I'll try and get some answers out of the director. So he goes to the director's office again, the door of which is so cool. It's like this big isosceles triangle that you have to like lift to get inside of. Just amazing set design as always with this film. And he goes into the director's office and yeah, the director is Caligari. Oh my god, jump scare. And at this point Caligari kind of recognizes him, whereas Francis is like, oh my god, it's him, and he just runs out of the office terrified. But I don't think Caligari gets like a good enough look at his face to know for sure if that was like the guy from earlier. Which is maybe why Caligari isn't so flustered about the whole situation. Whereas, yeah, Francis has done a runner and he's gone straight to the doctors, and he's told them, lads, that is the fella who's been hanging around the local fair. We need to get him caught. We need to get proof. So they wait for Caligari to go to sleep in his villa, and Francis and the doctors all break into Caligari's office, and they find a bunch of rather incriminating evidence.
Yeah, they find a book titled Somnambulism, Caligari's specialty apparently. And they find a story in there about the Cabinet of Dr Caligari. It's a whole story written about a man named Caligari, accompanied by Caesar, in northern Italy in 1783, who was basically sowing panic among the village folk at the time, um, through a series of murders that are basically identical to what's been going on these last few days
Yeah.
and weeks.
He
So in
even
the
had a
story-
life-size dummy of him.
Yeah, exactly. Even a life-size dummy of Caesar. So in the story, Caligari subjected the somnambulist to his will, and he got him to carry out his crimes for him. So basically some sort of control thing going on here. While an identical puppet, as Harry said, was created to avoid suspicion. And then they find Caligari's diary, which contains a recording saying that a somnambulist has been brought to the institution. So they're kind of piecing this thing together piece by piece, as to what Caligari's motivations have been this whole time.
Yeah, and we get a flashback then of them sort of wheeling in Caesar for the first time into his office, and he's absolutely ecstatic. It's because in his diary it said something on the lines of like, finally, a somnambulist has been brought to the asylum. So he ushers them all out, and he's you can see his eyes kind of widen, and he's basically got the world is his oyster now that he has a somnambulist that he is planning on controlling. And he runs out of his office, and it's really well edited, where it's just like, you must become Caligari, It's like, first of all, it kind of like looks like graffiti on the wall, but then it actually like comes to life and is like actually like coming on the screen, which for a 1920 film to do that is incredible.
Yeah. I'm just going to jump in. Caligari at this point
Yeah.
basically lays out his entire plan word for word, so that pretty obvious to dummies like me. So he says that he wants to discover whether it's true that a somnambulist can be compelled to perform acts that he wouldn't in a waking state. So yeah, basically his plan is to find a way to control this person, and get him to commit murders on his behalf. That way it wouldn't come back to him. Yeah, that way he wouldn't come under any suspicion.
And that concludes Act 5. Act 6. Pretty much, Caesar has been found in a field somewhere. They have found him asleep. He is a somnambulist after all. And the doctors bring him to Caligari, and Francis demands a confession from Caligari. The proof is there. The letter's there. The diary's there, sorry. The books are there. The evidence is irrefutable. And Caligari basically just has a freaker and starts swinging and goes after the doctors, but they manage to restrain him, and they put him in a padded jacket and they throw him in a cell. And we go back to Francis. Yeah, he's in a straitjacket. He's been caught as Dr. Caligari. And we then sort of flash forward again as we were at the beginning of the film with the epilogue, and Francis is recounting the whole story to the old man about, everything that him and his wife have been through. And we see Jane in the courtyard of the asylum. She's just kind of staring off into the distance because this has clearly been really traumatic for her. We also see Caesar. He's also now in the asylum, and he's got flowers and he's kind of picking them. He actually seems pretty chill. And there's a bunch of other people who are like quite angrily shouting at the camera. And he says to the old man that Caesar, you should never allow him to tell you your fortune. And
then he goes up to
then we
Jane.
discover the twist.
Yeah, because he goes up to Jane, Francis, and he asks her to marry him, but she kind of just looks way into the distance, almost like absent-minded. And she says that queens are not free to answer the calls of their heart. So clearly, whatever Francis has been telling us for this whole period of time, that him and Jane were in love. basically he's an unreliable narrator. It's pretty obvious at this point in time. So we can't really trust anything that he said for this whole last hour and a bit. Francis says that everyone thinks that he's insane, but it's not him who's insane, but the director of the asylum, who obviously we know from the story is Dr. Caligari. And then he's the one who has to be physically restrained in a straitjacket. So a bit of a callback to the previous scene. And then we kind of wonder, was it all a dream? The director realizes that Francis thinks he is Caligari, and now he says he knows how to treat him. And then that's the end. That's the end of Act 6. It's the end of the film. What do you think? Was it a dream? Was it?
Yeah, no, I definitely think it was all in Francis's head.
Yeah,
I think this is all just an idea that a guy in an insane asylum has kind of conjured up in the courtyard, and he sort of the anti-authoritarian ideas that came from the two writers who were both pacifists and anti-war and didn't want to get involved in the war and the German regime and stuff. This is Francis being anti-establishment as well, because he is anti the director, who as well, it's interesting that the actor Werner Krauss for this final scene as the director doesn't have all the gothic makeup that he had as Caligari. He's far more well put together. He seems far more normal and humane, whereas he almost looked like a zombie of sorts throughout the film as Caligari. So yeah, I think it was all an apparition in Francis's head that he kind of conjured up. And I think, because it's interesting, I feel like with a lot of films in the 20s, this might come across as almost like an uneducated thing to say, but like I just feel like a lot of films in the 20s, particularly the 10s, didn't know how to end a film.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think for this film to end on like such a twist, because like it's not like nowadays where if you say, oh, it was all a dream in his head, it's like overplayed. This is a 1920, lads. Nothing is overplayed. This is like the first this is one of the first like big motion pictures pretty much to get an international release and well received.
Literature and stuff like that, maybe
yeah.
They're obviously bringing in, because
but as far as cinema goes,
there's not that much of a cinema history exactly, so a lot of the ideas that they would have had maybe would have come from stuff like literature and like kind of mythology almost.
Yeah, I do feel like there's a bit of Frankenstein in this. I do feel there's some nods to Frankenstein here for sure, with Caesar obviously being likened to Frankenstein and Caligari being... Oh, sorry. Oh my god, I did the thing that I always give out to people for doing. With Caesar being like Frankenstein's monster and Caligari being like Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein. And yeah, overall, I think this film is a straight up masterpiece. I think it's incredible. It's between this and Metropolis for what I think is the best silent film ever made. Because obviously with Chaplin's later works like Modern Times, there's like little bits of sound in there. So are they silent films? Like, yeah, but are they? It's a tricky one. Modern Times is a masterpiece as well, though. But of the 20s, this is definitely in my top 2 silent films. And the one thing I'll say is Metropolis is like 3 hours long. This is like an hour and 15. So therefore, if you're to start watching silent films, go with this one first. I have said it a million times and I will say it forever. This is the perfect first silent film for anyone, I believe. I think the direction is incredible. The set designs are immaculate. Arguably, maybe not even arguably, the best set designs maybe in the history of cinema. Like, this was shot in 2 months. Less than 2 months in a studio with like no lights. And what they conjured up is nothing short of magic. It's genuinely an incredible film.
It genuinely looks better than like a lot of big kind of blockbuster studio kind of films, in the sense of how realistic it looks. Like I wouldn't have known that.
Yeah,
I obviously knew that there was certain stuff going on, like, but I wouldn't have known that it was basically paper sets, the majority of it, unless I'd researched it. I mean, they do look convincing.
Yeah, no, I just absolutely love this film. It's like essential German expressionism, which was like a huge impact on Alfred Hitchcock, who we've covered 8 times now on the podcast, and we'll be covering again next week with Notorious. because Hitchcock studied a lot of his film in Germany, so hence we had films like Rebecca and Suspicion that had all those sort of shadowy scenes, particularly Rebecca. And yeah, I just think this film is an absolute masterpiece. I gave it 5 out of 5. I think for a film of such cultural importance, such cinematic importance, I yeah, it's incredible. What did you think?
Yeah, I'd never seen it before, and I can't basically only co-sign everything you just said. It is a masterpiece. It looks so good for a film that was over 100 years old. Like I said, it's visually it's better than a lot of studio films that come out, which is, I mean, as much as I have an indictment on those films as I do praise for this film, considering obviously the budgets that are involved. But yeah, like I said at the start, silent film is not something that I'm as much up on as I should be. But off the handful I've seen, this is the best silent film. It's so easy to get into. It hooked me from the start, just with the kind of brooding music, the over the top performances, particularly from Werner Krause's Dr. Caligari, which is intentional and which is a good choice because there's no two ways about it. He's meant to be a villain for most of the film. The only quibble I have with the film is the ending, which I think I've gone back and forth on it since I've seen it a couple of days ago. Like initially I didn't like it, and then I kind of talked myself around to liking it, and now I'm back to not liking it because I just, maybe it's because the whole it wasn't all a dream kind of thing is kind of played out now. We know, and you can only bring your own experiences to a film. Obviously at the time, as Harry said, it wouldn't have been as much of a cliche, but I kind of like the idea of this like gothic dark horror. And yeah, I kind of think the ending is a bit of a cop out, if I'm honest. Sitting here right now, but I could change my mind in a few days. Like I said, I've already changed it a couple of times, so what's one more? But yeah, anyway, thoughts about the ending aside, it is a classic horror film. It's a classic silent film, and yeah, I think I really actually like your suggestion that it's a great introduction to silent film, because if you haven't seen it, it's a really easy watch. Like you can kind of see the influence, the influences it's had on other kind of, how it's influenced, I should say, other more modern films. But yeah, it's a classic film, and yeah, I gave it 4.5 stars, but it could just as easily be 5. I don't know why it's 4.5. I can be a bit of a stickler sometimes. Yeah, I can just be a bit of an idiot. So anyway, you should watch this film if you're in any way interested in silent films. Yeah, definitely.
And that is the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Thank you so much for the support as of late, guys. It's been amazing. As I said from the top, if we could hit 100 subscribers in the next couple of weeks, I think that would be a cool first sort of milestone for us to hit. Analytics wise, I think we've had some nice milestones, but I think just the nice round number of 100 subscribers just looks so good.
Yeah, it does.
And then I don't know. We'll push for 1,000, but that's next year's problem.
Yeah,
That's next year's issue. This year, if we can just hit 100 subscribers the next couple of weeks, and then I don't know. We'll see if the snowball effect can kind of push the channel, because yeah, we're getting a nice little follow in every episode. We're kind of picking up a few more people, which is nice.
picking up
And
more
yeah, it'd be
steam.
interesting to see.
Yeah, things are starting to kind of go a little bit, like it's, people are starting to follow us more and more, and that's really nice. I think the Seven Seal episode was a big kind of boon for us in terms of there was a lot of people probably checking us out who hadn't seen us before. And yeah, we're going to start doing more stuff like this. We're going to finish off the 40s Hitchcock kind of arc, and then after that, then it's going to be much more what we've been doing the last few weeks, which is little films here and there from different genres, German expressionism, Italian neorealism, those kind of things. So it's not going to be just all one director or one kind of decade. It's going to be much more spread out to try and give more people what they kind of want, maybe from these older films.
Yeah, we'll kind of put the feelers out anyway in the comments as well. Let us know what films you want to see us covering. I've a fair idea of some films I really want to cover soon. I know Shane's the same, and we'll maybe get into a discussion about that at another date, or maybe in the comments if people have some suggestions. We'll happily kind of reply away there. But in the meantime, thank you very much for all of your support. Next week is Alfred Hitchcock's return to the podcast. Yay! It's notorious. It's a great film. Don't worry, guys. It's not
classic.
Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
Classic.
Yeah, it's a brilliant film, which is also free on YouTube. So if you've not seen it, definitely give it a watch. It's pretty quintessential Hitchcock, actually. It's a very good film. So yeah, in the meantime, any support is much appreciated, and that has been the Golden Hour Film Podcast. I've been Harry Bailey,
I've been Shane Levin.
and we will see you all next week. Goodbye.